Something that I feel like I didn't know about and now I use it a lot is just the fact of editing Tableau's XML file. And it's because I used to think this was absolutely terrifying. But so what it is, you have your Tableau desktop workbook saved, on your computer. And if you right click and you open it in a notepad, you're going to get an XML file that looks like this. And when I did this, I was overwhelmed. I'm like, oh, why would I ever use it? But a reason that I wanted to say it and kind of get it out there is because if you need to do any kind of mass updating for a dashboard, this will save you so much time. So for example, one thing that happened was, a company rebranded their colors. And so all the dashboards needed to have their colors replaced. And there was a chart, 1-to-1, if it was this blue, now it's this purple. And so you can go into the XML, search for that blue hex code, and then just do find and replace that blue hex code with the purple one that you need. It also is great. This is a website that I pulled it from because it's got good examples. So again, you can go into Tableau. If you need to change it from an area chart to a bar chart, you go into Tableau and you can change it. But if you need to change all of them across your workbook, you can go into the XML and do that. And the other big thing was if you're using Tableau Desktop prior, I think it's if you're using a version older than 2021.3, then for accessibility standards, the focus of the dashboard is not set up to be compliant. And so you can go into this XML file to make sure that your dashboard is WCAG compliant with the focus group so that you're having the best experience for all of your users. After 2021.3, Tableau kind of incorporated that, but beforehand you have to go in and do this. I want to talk about the XML because it's something that I kind of never thought I would need, but you can actually use it for a lot of things, and you can even incorporate, you can run it with Python and stuff to really speed up time as well. So that's what I have.
That's awesome. I've put that thing on steroids with Alteryx in the past too, because Alteryx is good with a rules engine around hey, we want to do these 17 things, and rather than having you do 17 find replace, it can be good for that. That's super cool. I love that.
Awesome.
There's also another. Well, real quick.
I'm going to drop off, but thank you guys.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks for doing this. This was awesome.
I'm so excited. So thank you.
We've also used Alteryx in the past to do basically rip out all of the calculated fields that you have in a Tableau workbook. So all that calculated field information is embedded inside of the XML. And so there's some cool things that you can do, and it'll spit out a Tableau workbook that has all your calculated fields and so forth. So, Anna,
can you guys see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. And I we didn't want to rush that, but we knew that Nicole had to jump, so we had to jump to her to tip and trick first, which I'm glad we did, because honestly, I didn't realize you could do all of that. So, and Nelson, I guess I'm just gonna have to ask you more questions. And so my trick is not at all like that level. I went pretty basic because, a lot of you already know that I am a former math teacher. In my mind, I'm still a math teacher in a lot of ways. And so one of actually would have in my classroom, quote from Ice Cube, of course, check yourself before you wreck yourself. I tell this to my kids all the time too, because I think it's probably some of the best advice you could ever heed. And so if you ever had your math teacher say, check your work, check your work, check your work, they mean it, because it's so easy to make a little mistake. So if you're working in Tableau and you're trying to check your work and trying to make sure that your numbers match up, you might be like me where you like to keep a calculator. Maybe I'm just really comfortable with my calculator. But has anyone ever, used, and you can raise your hand, I probably won't see you, but if you've ever used a calculator to check your Tableau work. I can't see if you raise hands. Hey, that's pretty cool. Y'all can raise hands. I still use my calculator from time to time, but I found a couple ways that you can use Tableau to check some of these things. So I'll do this real quick. And I just wanted to show a couple of things that with calculations in Tableau of ways to check yourself. So the first thing I'm going to do actually has more to do with how to check if your table calculation's working. A lot of you've seen this before, so I apologize if you've never, if I'm boring you, it's a repeat. But I honestly, when I started working in Tableau, I was really concerned, is Tableau doing what I want it to do? So for example, when you do a table calculation or a quick table calculation in Tableau, to answer a question like this, you want to know, is it calculating correctly? So we can go into the pill right here, and I'm going to go ahead and add some text so you can see what's going on here. And we can go to the pill. I always say it's the pill doing the writing if it's a text pill, and click on it to add a quick table calculation. And the table calculation can do percent of total, and ta-da, you have your percent of total. Now, I taught this so many times, I would say, hey, most likely you can do quick table calculations. If you have only one dimension in your view, I used to say it's going to be right. Until one day it wasn't. Because for whatever reason, Tableau decided to not compute using the dimension in my view, and it was completely wrong. So don't forget, whoops, wrong pill. You can go into edit table calculation to see how it's computing and change on which dimension it's computing. Now, again, if you have one dimension in your view, most likely it's working just fine, but I did find that one off in the middle of a class I was teaching going, oh, so nothing was checked here. I don't know why that happened. So check that. A lot of you folks can think in a different way than I do, and you can do the across down. My brain doesn't work that way. When at least when I first started working in Tableau, I understand what it means now, but I honestly didn't when I first started working in Tableau. So I had to think about it in terms of dimensions. And so the second way I want to show this is with, okay, how can you check that those numbers are right, or if you're using the right compute using in another situation? So in this situation, I'm going to look to see which marketing channel contributed to the highest percent of sales each year. So within each set of year, I need all of the bars to add to 100%. And so if I add a quick table calculation and do percent of total, and let's make sure we can see our labels there. How do I know that if these add to 100%? Well, sniff test, it doesn't, you can even tell. But one little thing you can check down here at the bottom is it does give you that number. So long as it's the pill that's in the columns or rows, it'll give you that number down here at the bottom. So it's telling me the actual 100% is all of the panes together. If I wanted to look at, for example, only 2019 though, here's a little trick. You can lasso all of those bars, and at the bottom, it'll tell you what percent that was total. So you don't have to get out a calculator. You can just check that and go, yeah, that's not what I'm looking for. So do a quick check into editing your table calculation. And I'll show you this little trick Andy Kriebel taught it. He said he got it from somebody else, but I'll give him credit that you can say a sentence and just think about what you uncheck is what you're trying to calculate. So for each marketing channel, or is it for each year, you're trying to calculate the percent of total what? So what's checked is what you're taking the percent of. So what I want to know is for each year, I want to find the percent of total sales for all the marketing channels together. And if this works out correctly, at the bottom, it should say 400% because you have 4 years, and that's 100 times 4. I know you knew that already. You didn't need a calculator for that. But if you wanted to check that the bars within that year add to 100, you just lasso them and voila, there's your 100%. So someone else already in the chat gave some of my little tip away. That's okay, because that means you're on the ball and you already know how to check yourself and not wreck yourself. So all good there. But I do want to show that little, you can Google this. Andy Kriebel has this video explaining how to use those table calculations in a sentence to figure out which boxes you're unchecking versus checking, especially when you have many, many, many dimensions in your view and you're like, okay, I got to make sure this number makes sense, what's right. So this shows you for each what, uncheck those boxes. I'm calculating, in this case, percent of total by which dimension, and that's the one that's checked. Some of you think that way already, so don't fault me for not thinking that way naturally, especially being a math teacher. Like, I have to really think about it, not just so I understand it, but I'm always thinking about how am I going to communicate it to someone else. So this was a way for me to do that, and that's why I loved this little trick. Okay, so somebody else pointed this out already. So, but you're right, you can use the summaries. So if you go to the worksheet at the top and show the summary, you get this summary box to the right here. Make it bigger. And this will show you what's going on in your data. In fact, you can even add more fields there. In the drop-down menu, you can also, for example, look at skewness and kurtosis, because by the way, if you're going to run regression, you can't have high kurtosis, not really, really high. Anything over 3 is not a normal distribution, and you're not going to be able to run a very reliable regression line, but that's another story. So what you could do though is in your view, and I'm just looking at all my products here in the Superstore. If you wanted to look at what these values were for just the above average, those products that sell and profit above average, that's always fun. Oh, another tip, you lose your title, you can just drag it back here. Undo never works. So I'm going to try to drag this is that lasso trick again. If you lasso the points that you want in your view and just want to look the summary stats of those, your summary statistics will update for you. I actually didn't even know that till recently, because I just didn't know that. Like, nobody sat down and showed that to me. And I went, wait a second, I don't need a calculator. So again, somebody else may already knew that, and I thought these were pretty simple tricks, but if you didn't know those, it may save you some time. It definitely saved me some time. And the last one, of course, the use case here is if you have that filter on there and you want to see how something changes, just to, you know, again, I'm thinking about sniff testing your stats here. Does this make sense? And you want to look what's happened to, for example, our products of categories that are the least profitable here, and you want to look at some of these summary stats over time, you can go through and click on keep them lassoed. Oh no, that worked a second ago. If you move that, it won't. Keep them lassoed, and you can see how some of these change. So you can see how those values can change. And again, the drop-down menu in the summary will give you some other types of metrics that you can look at. So that was my hoping to be quick tip, trick, and hopefully that'll help you not have to use calculator as much. But don't forget to always check your math, because I'm a math teacher, and of course I'm going to tell you that.
Awesome.
All I got.
Love it.
I love that.
Let's see here. I'm trying to share my screen, and I'm trying to share this. All right, peeps. You feel like you should just be able to do this 2 years into this whole virtual thing. Do you guys see my screen?
It's
Yes, sweet.
I still see
Awesome.
the tips and tricks. Yep.
How about now? Even better?
Yep. We see it.
Cool. All right. So we put out there and said, hey, what would you like to learn this week? Justin, Brian, both kind of dug into this idea of like getting adoption. So that could be adoption of a dashboard, adoption of an analytic insight. There's Emily just been a great presentation talking about all the different ways to make things easier for users so that they'll actually use the stuff that you make. And so this is like a passion point for me. One of the things, obviously, I think many of you know, we started an organization about 3 years ago. And one of the things that I just got really passionate about was this idea of like, if we build stuff and nobody uses it, one, that's a big waste of money. That's a big waste of value. It's a big waste of time, big waste of energy and effort. And it turns out, I believe, that if you are thoughtful on the front end, you can actually not just get good adoption, you can get amazing adoption, but you've got to be really intentional about it. And so what is it and how does it look in order to get that adoption? It's kind of, one of the things that we love to think about here is just the idea of beginning with the end in mind. And so I love to show this, and if you've been around ATUG for a while, you've probably seen a demonstration of this before, but we have clients, if you work inside of an organization, you have the teams that you're supporting or the business units and so forth. So here that may be, very often you come into this kind of situation, right? And it's like, hey, I've got some data and I'm trying to do this thing with it, right? I'm trying to create success. I'm trying to create an insight so we make a better decision and improve the way that things are going, right? And some of the folks that you talk to may have awareness for the challenge that can be, and some of them have no idea, right? But for many of you, you are familiar with this kind of full-on data lifecycle. I got to take the data and I got to do some integration to get it from one place to another, and then I got to store it somewhere, and then I got to clean it back up, make sure it's of a good quality, and then I may transform it or pivot it or do something funky. Once I do that, I'm gonna have to validate it all over again, and then I want to roll it up so that it's fast and performant, and then I'm going to ask some questions and visualize it in some form or fashion. I'm going to have a layout of that so I can ask multiple questions at the same time and see how those questions play off of each other with some version of interactivity. And then I want to make sure that whatever shows up there is going to tell a story, and then if we do all those things just right, then we will have been successful and create the insight and make better decisions. And sure, you could start with the data, but I'm going to tell you that's rarely going to work the way you think it is going to work. Instead, what we actually focus on around here is this idea of kind of beginning with the end in mind. And so if we can engage with a stakeholder, a client, a business team, and kind of say, hey, when we are successful and build you the greatest whiz bang awesome thing, what is it? What does it do? Whose hands is it in? How often are you looking at it? What are the questions that it's answering? What is not just the first question, the second level question, third level question, so forth, depending on how far down you kind of want to go with this, and begin to work that all the way back. Like, what are some of the stories you want to be able to tell? And, ideally, how would you interact with something like this? And really get to a place where you've kind of sketched this thing out all the way down, as far into the data lifecycle as you need to. Like, if you need to get all the way back to source data, well, the source data that you pick and what you put into a data warehouse should be directly correlated to the questions that you're answering and the insight you're trying to create, and the decisions that are going to be made. I'm a believer that data warehouses shouldn't be full of data just so that we can get all the data. You'll never finish. Rather, you should have data in the warehouse that is designed to answer specific questions, because it's a lot faster to build it that way. And then once you've got a great plan, you just come back and develop this thing. And make it so that you already know what you're shooting at, right? You already know what the aggregation should be because that was part of your success criteria, and you already know what the dashboard layout should be because that was part of your success criteria. And so the development goes just a lot faster when you do it in this kind of formulaic thing. And I kind of love this quote because it puts me in the right mindset of how am I thinking about this? How am I wrapping my brain around this? And so it's just this idea of before deciding what to measure, we must begin by deciding what we want to improve, right? Improvement should always be the key focus. Otherwise, why do it, right? If you build a dashboard that's pretty, but it doesn't help anybody and it doesn't answer the questions that need to be answered, it will be that tree in the forest that falls and nobody hears. So there's that. The other thing that I would say too, again, this is another part of the big passion. Every successful solution that I've ever seen, including analytic solutions, I've ever seen, all have these three components. The first component is going to be people. So you have to know who your audience is. And not just who the audience is, but ideally in a future state, what would the ideal behavior of that person be? Now, sometimes it's helpful to go to like your best salesperson and be like, you're really good at this. Like, what is it that you do on a day in and day out basis or a weekly basis or monthly basis or quarterly basis that makes you so good at what you do? And then you begin to try to create analysis or a dashboard that helps facilitate the thing that makes that person so good and multiply that and scale that for other people, right? That's a really interesting use case for thinking about ideal behavior, right? But it could also be like, hey, this is the current way that people behave and we want to change that behavior. And so we're going to facilitate that using analysis or making it easy. And so again, understand your audience. If you have an executive audience or an analyst audience or whatever it may be, understand kind of their persona and the ideal behavior that you want out of them, and start there. Then what you need to be able to do is, now that we have an informed human being, are they aware of the systems and the processes that are in place? Are there systems and processes that are in place so that that informed human can pull a lever and take an action when they need to, when the data says, hey, it's time to do something, right? It's time to create an action, right? Again, if you just give somebody knowledge and say, hey, things are really bad, but there's nothing they can do about it, it's a really helpless feeling, right? Then they'll get frustrated, they won't use your stuff again, right? So you've got to couple this idea of giving them the knowledge, but also giving them the ability to pull a lever so that they can make it better. And then, and only then, figure out what are the tools and technology to empower the human being and to facilitate the systems in the process, right? These three things have to work in tandem together. If you have two of these things, say you have a great process, you have great tools, but people are behaving badly, right? So now you've got the wild, wild west. You've got Tableau server and Snowflake and Alteryx and all this great stuff. And then you've got well-documented systems, but nobody's doing the right thing. It's like a bunch of 3-year-olds running around drawing on the walls, right? And so can't have that. If you have informed people and you have processes, but you don't have the technology, it's like everybody is doing great stuff in Excel and it takes 7 hours for everything to refresh, right? Like it's not going to work. You don't have the tools to make this thing happen, right? So you get the idea of two out of the three of these just doesn't work. So there's that. And if you need help thinking through like, well, hey, what tools make some of this stuff sing in the first place? We've got a list of them kind of here for you. Two other things that I would mention, and I could spend way too long on this, so I'll just go very briefly, but conceptually, there's this whole idea of like using this law of diffusion of innovation. And so there's this idea, and I've got a video at the end of this, and we'll send this deck out, I'm sure, that has Simon Sinek kind of talking through this. But the adoption of any idea or a dashboard or an analysis or anything like that typically looks something like this. Like you've got your innovators, and that's like, when it comes to, he uses Apple, so I'll use Apple because everybody gets it. Like the people that slept outside to get the first iPhone, like that's your 2.5% innovator. They identified, it spoke to the core of who they were. They wanted to be a part of it, and they didn't care how bad the first iPhone was. I mean, it was kind of cool, but it, comparatively, it didn't do hardly anything that our iPhones do now. But they were there for it, right? And they paid $1,000 for it, I'm sure. Then you have the early adopters, right? Those are the people that got iPhone 1 and iPhone 2. They didn't sleep outside for it, but like they were on that kind of bleeding edge, and they're like, I'm there, I'm interested. I know it's not perfect yet, but I'm here for it, right? And then there's this idea of the early majority, late majority, and the laggards. And the challenge for any idea is to get past those innovators and those early adopters. And basically that's like those two groups, when you add that up together, it's about 16% or 17% of the population. So basically most ideas can get about 15, 16, 70% of the population. And in many of your organizations, that's about the saturation that these analytical platforms have got. In order to get to a place where you can become a data-driven organization or be data literate, you have to have, near a majority of people have the ability to speak data. And until you cross over what's called the chasm, the tipping point right here, and get into that early majority, you're not going to get there. And so what does that look like when we think about like data literacy or data analytics? You're at those innovators, like I'm doing dark magic. Like this is super cool. Like I don't even, people don't even know how you did it. And now it's like, okay, cool. We have like champions, right? We've got super users. They do all this cool stuff. And there's like a group of them that are running around, making everybody else's life better. And then like getting into that early majority, it's like, your entire team or a business unit, it's like, hey, we have this great dashboard or dashboards, and that's how we begin to make decisions. And then you get into, okay, it becomes a common place in your organization where all of a sudden you're doing analysis on the fly in a dashboard in a meeting, right? And that just becomes normal. Right. And some of you can't even imagine that. And that the reason that you can't is because you're not there yet. That's not the maturity of your organization. And then for the laggards to get, it's like, fine, can I still have a cross tab, right? Can I still dump this to Excel? Your charts are pretty, but hey, and so there's that. Like I said, there's a big component of like getting in the tipping point. But I would encourage everybody, this video is like 9-10 minutes. If you want to understand how to get an idea to permeate into a really large audience, Like this video explains that idea. And the punchline really quickly is just this, you want to focus on not the majority. You want to focus on your champions and your early adopters and get them fired up and excited, because when the reality is your early majority, late majority, and laggards, they're skeptical. They're skeptical of new things, and they will not trust or buy into a new idea until they see somebody else be successful with it. And so you're not going to get them. So like, broadcasting your, hey, we got this brand new dashboard, it's amazing, to 200 people is not going to succeed. You're still going to get 10, 15, 20 people out of that. Those early adopters, those innovators, those early champions, those will be the ones that, wrap their arms around it. And the rest of the people will not do it until they watch those champions be successful with those tools. And so you've got to fire up and focus on your champions rather than trying to go get everybody else. So I'm very big on, proof of concept, crawl, walk, run, where your crawl is focused on super users, and then hype up the success of the super users. Because then all of a sudden, when your majority sees those super users creating success, they're going to want to be a part of that.